Ben, while we have you, though, we want to talk about yet another Democrat who's running for president. He's declared already. I'm talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., really in some hot water from these remarks over the weekend where he was heard on camera at this dinner party there in the Upper East Side of New York City. It was reported by New York Post reporter Jonathan Levine, who was at the dinner. And the comments were pretty, bold and controversial. He was asked about COVID-19, the origins of the pandemic, to which he espoused some pretty, frankly, just really shocking comments about what he thinks COVID-19 was all about. Help us elucidate this even further. What did Robert F. Kennedy Jr. say about COVID-19 that's getting him in such hot water?
He suggested there's the possibility that COVID was an engineered bioweapon, that he started talking about how various governments are trying to use DNA to engineer bioweapons to target specific ethnic groups, and noted that based on his reading and what he'd observed, that COVID had impacted Caucasians and people of African descent, but had been less problematic. Suggested this may have been targeted towards Chinese and people of Chinese descent and people of Ashkenazi Jewish descent, which got into all sorts of terror. Broadly touching on anti-Semitic tropes as well as just being wacky.
Yeah. I want to put up the tweet because we can talk about how he's responding to all this. This is what he tweeted. I believe this was yesterday. He said, "How devious are the MSM, mainstream media, attack dogs? Here is the question." New York Post, Jonathan Levine asked my press office, "What do you say to critics who might think saying coronavirus was a bioweapon made to kill white and black but spare Jews might be anti-Semitic?" So there's been this kind of evolution, Ben, of this story. First, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Denied that he said it. Then the video came out and said that that whole dinner was supposed to be off the record. But then, of course, there was video of it and journalists at the dinner. So it looks like it's kind of cleanup on aisle 9 for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But where does he go from here?
I think he continues to do what he's doing. Look, it's a question about what his presidential campaign is, that he's having a dinner, that there's previously a story about a bout of two-member people at the dinner engaging in competitive flatulence at the dinner, one of whom was a septuagenarian art critic. That there's a question what type of campaign you're running for a Democratic presidential nomination if the way you're trying to court influence is to have off-the-record dinners with the New York Post and an aging art critic on the east side of Manhattan. That this is, that in his announcement speech, he said, "They can't silence me anymore," that this is very much clearly a platform for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to talk about all his peculiar ideas and, frankly, sometimes he's a crank, and the off-the-wall ideas that he's proposing, and to try to get media attention for that rather than a serious presidential campaign. This is not someone who's going to precinct meetings in New Hampshire. He's going on podcasts, and there's no reason to think that he'll stop going on podcasts or start, hitting up diners in New Hampshire in the near future.
Yeah, Ben, I want to put up some comments. His family, obviously, he comes from a very prominent American family. Some of his family members are denouncing these comments outright. His nephew there, Joe Kennedy III, former member of Congress, saying, "My uncle's comments were hurtful and wrong. I unequivocally condemn what he said." Even his sister here, Carrie Kennedy, saying, "I strongly condemn my brother's deplorable and untruthful remarks last week about COVID being engineered for ethnic targeting." Now, Kennedy Jr. is just saying, Ben, that he was just bringing to light the fact that there are supposed bioweapons engineering programs the U.S. Is conducting, and many would argue that that is also somewhat of a crank proposition. But I wanted to just ask you, because there is such an appeal on the right for some of Kennedy Jr.'s views, but he's running as a Democrat. And so I think a lot of voters are struggling on where he fits in ideologically, politically. They can't really make him out. What do you make of that?
Well, he doesn't fit in. And, you don't need to fit in. We've gone to a political party system in which there tends to be checklists for what politicians believe in, that if you say you're a Democrat politician, you can take out 10 issues, how you feel on 10 of them. And on the counter, if you're a Republican, how you feel about 10 of them. for the same thing for no labels and for the centrist proposition that's coming out, that most people are much weirder and much more idiosyncratic than that. And he is a weird, idiosyncratic guy, running on this, this complex mix of ideas, much of which he only has attention because he has the last name Kennedy, and,
right,
which is one of the reasons he's running as a Democrat. But, he's talked about being pro-environment, about, support for gun control, for pro-choice, that he's genuinely a weird guy who doesn't quite fit into this political party system that we're in, who's sort of stumbling his way through, and also not seriously trying to court people. He's just doing himself and using this as a platform for his own theories and ideas rather than a serious attempt for the presidency right now.
Yeah, because that was my last question to you, Ben. I mean, how much purchase does he have, especially amongst Democrats? Because obviously President Biden, he's the incumbent, he's running for re-election. I mean, where does this go? Like you said, is he just kind of angling to get more of his really far out there ideas, more purchase with the wider public, or at least get more eyeballs and ears on them? Because, he wants to debate Joe Biden. He said that. I don't think that's going to happen. So what do you think is next for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.?
Well, we'll see what happens. Look, part of when you talk about the burst of approved numbers that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had in the polls, that he was hitting 20% of the polls, yeah, that Democrats are not entirely excited about Joe Biden. They're concerns about his age in particular. And he was a convenient none of the above option. You had the last name Kennedy. It's a name brand. If you think Joe Biden's old, I'll vote for the Kennedy. And those numbers have gone down as his name ID has risen among Democrats. But his support has picked up with Republicans.
Okay.
His one opportunity right now is that New Hampshire's insisting on going first in the Democratic primary, which is its own story, as an unsanctioned contest, and Joe Biden's name won't be on the ballot. So that if somehow he finishes first in New Hampshire and without Joe Biden on the ballot, which I think a lot of New Hampshire Democrats are concerned about, that would be an opportunity for attention. But that also cancels out that, as you mentioned, his ideas appeal most to Republicans, and they seem to have a far more competitive and interesting contest. That if your biggest issue is your opposition to vaccine mandates, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis seem far more appealing than a beauty contest opportunity to cast a vote for RFK Jr.
All right, Ben Jacobs, we'll leave it at that. Always an enlightening conversation with you. Thanks so much for your reporting. We'll talk again.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.